I'm sorry.
I said 8. Oh, 8, yeah. That's it? There's no
Good afternoon. We could all find our seats. This is a special board meeting notice of which was duly provided to board members as required by Section 4 of the MTA bylaws. Under the bylaws, the matters under consideration today are limited to those matters stated in the notice. Today we're here to discuss the L-Train project. As noticed, there is no formal board action being taken today. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Marino to call to the podium those members of the public who have registered and wish to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to remind all the public speakers that when I call your name, please go to the podium and you have 2 minutes to speak. The first speaker today will be Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer.
Thank you very much. I am Gale Brewer, Manhattan Borough President, and I'm here. We had sent a letter to the governor with copies to the MTA after we had a press conference. Eric Adams, Borough President of Brooklyn, and myself with other elected officials, and I think there's about 10 elected officials without reading the whole thing, but basically talks about an independent analysis needed to evaluate the long-term viability of the Canarsie Tunnel. We want to know about maintenance of the existing mitigation plan that our communities have collectively worked to outline, and I think you all know, and I want to thank the MTA staff because for the last couple of years, along with DOT, there has been a great deal of support for planning what is going to happen. And I think that there needs to be, as goodness knows, this is better than Law and Order, which we all watch on a daily basis, in terms of intrigue, and that's why you have so many people here today. But we all read the New York Times today, so there's a lot of issues regarding the future of what is going to happen. So this particular letter goes through a full review. We want to understand exactly what the changes are, if they're going to take place. We want to make sure, although we've been told by Andy Byford, for whom we have a lot of respect, that the changes in terms of the stations and the platforms and the ADA and so on would continue. But I'm here to say, I think I can speak on behalf of all the elected officials who wrote this letter, that we do want answers to the questions raised here. And we also are very concerned because of what we read in the New York Times today. And so we're here to listen. We're also here to say that we want the very best for our constituents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Borough President. The next speaker is Sean Picker. Mr. Picker will be followed by Alex Gregor.
Shaul Picker, first of all, but, okay. Board members, President Byford, Chairman Ferrer, and hardworking transit employees, I'm here because the situation is too dire not to speak up. President Byford, I admire how you've dealt with the changes professionally. Employees have spent years on the plan and have engaged in the best public relations effort I've seen this agency make. With the sudden change, the public has lost trust in the agency, and many transit workers feel demoralized. Such a change is justified in certain instances, not this one. The panel only spent an hour examining the tunnel in person, and the plan consists of a PowerPoint with graphics and bullet points, nothing concrete. The plan disregards elements of the original plan, the repairing of tunnel lining and track bed, and the installation of new tracks and third rail, and there's been no mention of fortifying the tunnel for future storms. The ex-MTA CC head stated this solution might last a few decades instead of half a century. Ex-President Bianco, who worked on safety and oversaw Sandy repair work, strongly warned it could be unsafe. It needs to be thoroughly evaluated to ensure workers and riders are safe. Let's not forget that a faulty bench wall resulted in the 2015 G-train derailment. It's unclear whether it can be completed within the allocated time and while maintaining adequate service. 55 hours over a weekend is limiting, and much of it's spent getting workers and equipment in and out. In addition, L service every 15-20 minutes late nights and weekends will result in dangerous crowding. L trains are crowded evenings despite trains every 4 minutes, and some stops see more usage on weekends. Single-track operations require precision to ensure trains can pass each other without delay, which can be thrown off by someone holding doors or a sick passenger. If the new solution works, it should be done full-time in 9-12 months, reducing time, cost, and increasing productivity. The racking, which has only been installed in new tunnels, will need to be bolted on the tunnel wall, and like in old homes, you'll find more work to be done, requiring additional scope and change orders, increasing cost and dragging the project on. Worse, the changes might jeopardize the project's federal funding. The governor's influence on the board and law is limited to appointing its members. According to the 2009 Public Authority Reform Act, the board is supposed to perform duties in good faith, with due diligence and care, apply judgment in the best interest of the authority, its mission, and the public, and acknowledge the role and fiduciary responsibilities. The board's independence has been undermined, and I urge you to show you aren't the governor's rubber stamp and that you're willing to use your power for riders. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Alex Gregor, who will be followed by Lisa Daglian.
Good morning, Board. Alex Gregor. I'm Commissioner of Public Works for the town of Southampton, and I'm also a part-time resident in Brooklyn. We mostly use the F and the G line, but I have been on the L as well. And I just wanted to wish you a happy new year. And I wanted to talk about confidence. Confidence in ourselves, confidence in our departments, confidence in the public. And I feel that that has been eroded by this. As an elected official, it's just as important to you as appointed officials as elected that we go out and we try to do our due diligence and be unified and not second guess. And I do have concerns about the tunnel project. My research that I was able to go through, I didn't have the 1-hour tour through the tunnel, but I see that it's a 1924 tunnel that was made with concrete with rebar in it. And the tunnel was flooded. And the reports say it was brackish water. And I'm here to tell you that I believe it was seawater. It was from the tidal surge from Hurricane Sandy that affected most of the tunnels in the city of New York. And the worst enemy of old cement with rebar is salt water. I have concerns about the bench walls. That's the emergency exit for the public. If spalling is taking place in the concrete, and if the water has reached the rebar, that will continue to swell and continue to expand, and it will flake and break. And as a gentleman said before on the G train, part of it fell in and caused a derailment. I don't think using mechanic in a can to spray the old bench walls is the ticket. If that is not part of the monopore of the structure itself, if the bench was added later, the seawater is going to get in there and it's going to continue to erode. And I would just say, please take a close look. Don't pass judgment so fast. I'm also here as my...
Please summarize your remarks, sir.
Yeah, I'll finish up. Part of my reason to be here, too, is that we both compete for the same funding. And since there's been such discussion of the congestion pricing, and what I'm hearing is this money will go directly to the MTA, I don't think that's a good thing. All the infrastructure in the state of New York is in bad shape. We're in the 7th year of a 2% spending cap. People are holding back, elected officials are holding back on capital improvements because they want to get reelected. I respect you all, and I thank you very much for your time, and I enjoy using your system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Lisa Daglian, who will be followed by Judy Penson.
Hi. Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Daglian, the Executive Director of PCAC, on behalf of the Transit Riders Council. We were surprised, as most New Yorkers and many board members and MTA staff, when we heard Governor Cuomo announce his plan to avert the L train shutdown. Today's long overdue board briefing follows the initial press briefing, elected officials briefing, advocates briefing, and then even more press briefings. Almost 2 weeks later, those of us who could rearrange our schedules on short notice will finally learn the details of a plan that we heard has already been accepted by the MTA. We've been left with many more questions than answers. All we've seen so far is a PowerPoint presentation, not a plan. We have so many questions that we created an addendum, which we're happy to share with you. What we do know is that it's complex engineering work in a confined century-year-old underwater tunnel. Fixing the cables could conceivably compromise the concrete casing, which would be catastrophic. Of course we're concerned. We hope you are too. We need to be confident that New Yorkers traveling in a mile-long tube underwater will be safe in the event of fire or failure. Following the plan presentation, we urge you as board members to ask and consider the many significant questions that we have, including what's a safety plan for silica dust removal? Will work trains travel through active stations and communities? What damage will affixing the racking systems do to the tunnel walls? Why did PB, now WSP, discard this option years ago, and how has the condition of the tubes changed? What travel mitigation plans will stay in place? What work will actually commence on April 27th? And what's the rush now after 3 years of planning and community input? We need to do these repairs once. We need to do them right. Let's take a deep breath and let an in-depth, independent analysis be conducted, as announced by President Byford. We welcome innovative technologies that are less costly and more efficient, and we hope this proposed plan will do everything that we promised. But we're mindful of the old adage that if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. The safety of the traveling public is too important to let a political decision inform an engineering problem. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. The next speaker is Judy Penson, who will be followed by Benjamin Solitaire.
Sorry. Hello and thank you. My name is Judy Penson. There's no N. I'm a member of the 14th Street Coalition, a group of neighborhood organizations impacted by the L train project. We appreciate everyone's efforts on this complicated project with many moving pieces. As the project moves forward, we expect that the promises made to keep the community involved in the decision-making on the above-ground mitigation plans will be kept. The well-being of the commuters has been the focus until now, and we appreciate and understand that. We want to ensure the well-being and safety of the community is now taken into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Penson. The next speaker is Benjamin Solitaire, who will be followed by Bruce Hain.
Hi, how are you? I'm here today on behalf of the L Train Coalition in North Brooklyn. The coalition is a group of organized stakeholders and community members, business owners, and concerned citizens. It was formed 2.5 years ago in response to this crisis. And we've been working diligently with the community and the MTA and DOT. We are, as everybody else, taken by surprise and concerned with this recent announcement. I just want to read from a letter that we had recently put together. The goal of the coalition was to make sure that our businesses and citizens were served adequately and taken care of during the shutdown. And some of the key takeaways we have from this announcement are that the task of the L-Train Coalition and the North Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce will continue to be to fight with the best interest of the businesses and residences of the impacted communities. Therefore, we request significant additional information regarding timing of the project, safety, air quality, material specifications, economic impact, and transportation details during the new work schedule. We requested an independent engineering firm weigh in on the new plan and that evaluate the safety for the public. We believe that many of the specific proposals included within the plan to mitigate the effects of the shutdown were promising, and we asked for serious consideration of all the proposed transit changes that were part of the original plan, including new bike lanes, city bike expansion, new ferry service, the expanded and improved subway service, and select bus service. We requested all high-impact changes that have already begun to be implemented around new traffic patterns be considered and reviewed again within light of the new plan. And we asked for any previous agreement for face-to-face monthly meetings between the coalition and the MTA and DOT continue so that the community can stay involved in the process. Once again, we want to point out that we are here to help in any way possible. We directly represent the people and businesses that have spent the majority of the last 30 months wrestling with life-changing decisions as a direct result of official information that was released by the MTA. People have made decisions that they definitely would have changed today if they'd had the opportunity to. A significant amount of money has been spent.
Please summarize, Mr. Solitaire.
Hundreds of hours have been dedicated, and we look forward to working with you in the years ahead, months ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Bruce Hain, who will be followed by Chris Glorioso.
Hello, my name is Bruce Hain. I guess I'm billing myself as the foremost rail transportation planner of my generation by default. And well, I was amused to hear one of you board members, I don't know which one, the other day on YouTube saying, well, I'm all at sea. The consultants won't tell us what's going on, and neither will Cuomo. Well, it dovetails nicely with Cuomo's interest in being a hero, and he knows a lot about infrastructure. He does, as politicians go. And the thing is that it's not in their interest for you to know, and it's in our interest, the people of the city, for you to find out. And you have paid, not consultants, you have your own engineers, I think. You have a staff of engineers. I mean, there's a certain way to do it. It's not in your interest to know, and the dithering is part of the MO, because you see this remediation for the for not being able to get into the city was very expensively planned and paid for already. See, and now they can go on to a different version. Well, the way to do it is you close one tube at a time. It's insane to do it any other way. And you know, if some engineer will state with particularity why not, I'd like to know. But I think that should be made clear to them. You close one tube at a time, and you mediate it. You've got 900 feet between blocks, so that's 3,600 feet of track. You can store 3 trains or 6 trains there. Then you have 2 trains in the station at 8th Avenue. You close at 8th Avenue, and you can stage 8 trains and work on your scheduling to work in surges. 8 trains is a lot of trains. You could probably keep to every 4 minutes.
Mr. Hain, please summarize your remarks.
All right, so thank you very much. And if someone wants to do it any other way, I think they should talk to me first, because I'm not inclined to have it. I've seen enough of it.
Thank you. The next speaker is Chris Glorioroso, who will be followed by Jason Panero.
Hey, everybody. Sometimes the press office gets kind of busy. I'm a reporter from NBC New York, and so sometimes the easiest way to get some questions answered is just to come up and address you face to face. Specifically, Mr. Byford, I have some questions about the consultant contracts on this project. This is a 2016 consultant study that advocated for the closure for 15 months.
Excuse me, sir.
And
This isn't the forgive me.
I'm sorry?
Forgive me. This isn't the forum for questions. You'll have your chance for questions, and certainly look forward to it. This is the chance for the public to make comments.
I'm a member of the public.
Well, so am I. I'm simply saying this is the chance for the public to make comments. Do you mind?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm sure you
So essentially, what I'd like to know is how much did this consultant study cost, and should the MTA get a refund for it? A second issue that I'd like to bring up is we'd like to see the consultant contracts on this project be made public. I think it's helpful for riders to know what these contracts entail and whether or not we are likely to see any explanation for how a 180 change in the strategy might happen under these contracts, or whether they might require a new contract. Thirdly, I think there's a question that the riding public would want to know, given the events of this sort of 180 change in strategy here. Is there any questioning of how the MTA deals with consultants as a whole? We spend lots of money on consultants, and my question is, does this change from one idea, one strategy to the next mean we should have some questions about the entire use of consultants across the entire system? Lastly, one issue I'd like to bring up is to the consultants themselves that have worked on the L train project. It's a pretty dramatic change.
Mr. Glorioroso, please summarize your remarks.
Sure. It's a pretty dramatic change from asking for this tunnel to be closed for 15 months to saying that it can be opened the entire time, at least partially. Do the consultants fear that there's any loss of credibility when the advice goes from one point to the next and changes within a matter of days? So I'm hoping that in this hearing there'll be some talk about that, and specifically, Mr. Byford, I'm hoping you can address some of those issues. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. The next speaker is Jason Panero, who will be followed by Omar Vera.
Good afternoon, Mr. Byford, and good afternoon to the rest of the board members. As we all know, and the press knows, that this project has been discussed since our beloved COO, Ronnie Hinckham, was president of New York City Transit. 3 years of studies, outreach. I attended every and each, let's say, outreach event throughout Brooklyn and Manhattan. And why Governor Andrew Mark Cuomo came out of the blues and toured the tunnel for 1 hour. 1 hour is not enough time. 3 years of study was way enough to determine how the work was going to be done. First, we had 36 and 18 months. I went for the 18 month because having the tunnel fully closed made it short us to get the work done and get out. Why the Montague 2 was done ahead of schedule and below budget? Because it was done in an adequate way. But why changing all this technique on the L train shutdown, affecting thousands of people that travel along 14th Street and in Williamsburg, Brooklyn? Why changing the things at the last minute? I wish that Governor Andrew Mark Cuomo was here, that he will answer our questions face to face. But Freddie, let's see what's going to happen from now on until April 27th.
Thank you, Mr. Panero. Next speaker is Omar Vera. Mr. Vera will be followed by Jeffrey Smalls.
Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to this special edition of Emergency Board Meeting. And yes, apparently when the New Year came, this was odd because the governor then said he basically tore the tunnel, said that after 3 years of planning, first, like Jason said, we got the 18-month shutdown with both tubes to be closed, and then we shorted it to 15 months. That was in 2017. I'm like, fair enough. That's fine. But why this all of a sudden? All of a sudden, things change at the last minute, and now people are going to have a hard time adjusting to this. I mean, don't get me wrong. Canarsie Tunnel, like, it needs to be repaired, and it needs to be in good shape, but it needs to be done in an adequate way. And I understand that people are going to be frustrated for over a year to having to try alternative service. But I feel like the governor is trying to appease those who don't want the tunnel done, and who want to just let things keep going and uncertainties to happen. Certain disaster will happen eventually if the tunnels will get done. Canarsie Tube was constructed in 1924, after most of the Eastern Division was already up and running, even by 40 years earlier as elevated lines. So the governor needs to explain this new plan, the plan that supposedly has been done with the European metro systems like Paris and Berlin. He needs to explain how would it work and when would it start. He needs to give a timeline for how things would be done. Because otherwise, this is just going to be confusing. The people along 14th Street, including those who work at Google, are going to be confused as what's going on. Those who take the L train. People who commute to Brooklyn or from Brooklyn are also going to be confused on this. And President Byford, please, I like your plan, but like I said, this should be part of the top to bottom modernization of your plan with Fast Forward. Just the governor should explain, step by step, how is this better than just the plan that we have almost established with the preparatory work starting late last year. And with that, I shall see you all again here next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vera. The next speaker is Jeffrey Smalls, who will be followed by William Vega.
Good morning, Mr. President, MTA Board. My name is Jeffrey Smalls. I'm the president of Smalls Electrical Construction. I'm a third-generation contractor based in Brooklyn. We've been certified with the MTA since '97 as an MBE and a DBE contractor. My concerns are when large projects like this come up. We've done work on the Rockaway line. When Sandy hit, we were one of the contractors that enabled the TA to run trains again by doing all the traction power work, over 50,000 feet of cable. Montague Cube, we were also participating on that one as well. But when it comes to payments, we were called out for the second MU line. We did work on 86th Street and 96th Street, and the governor came down and basically said all contractors must be done by the end of the year, 2016. We were one of the contractors that went ahead of all the change orders, all the paperwork, and we got the work done. We did over $600,000 worth of additional work. And now, where we stand in 2019, we're still not paid for this work. We understand that the contractor got paid and refuses to pay us. They refuse to answer any of my calls, and we're trying to be a professional firm, but at the same time, we're a small company, and we need help. So for this new project, I'm asking that you have protections to allow subcontractors, whether it be second tier or third tier, when it comes to payment, have a seat at the table. We have a seat at the table when we get approved by the MTA as a subcontractor. We have a seat at the table when we're negotiating any change orders. And in this particular case, we were not present when these change orders were negotiated, and they went ahead and received money on our behalf and refused to pay us. So, and we're at the table when it comes time to get the job done. We were told clearly by the contractors, get the job done before the end of the year as the governor ordered. We went ahead and did our work, spent our own money, and borrowed money to get the work done. So we need protections in these large contracts to make sure that second and third tier subs are at the table when it comes to any payment concerns. And that's my major concern right now. And I'm still in an issue. And the performance of minority firms are looked at sometimes bad, but at the end of the day, there's a reason why we can't perform. If we don't get paid, we can't perform professionally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smalls. The next speaker is William Vega, who will be followed by Susan Reschia.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm sorry. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm speaking on behalf of my neighbors and businesses in Williamsburg. A lot of them had to make the decisions to leave their beloved neighborhood because of the shutdown of the L train. My neighbors have babies, children, and elderly to take care of, and a lot of the businesses relying on the L train traffic. And they're wondering, was that decision made too early? And now I have my neighbors asking me what's going to happen, because a lot of businesses and a lot of neighbors renew all of their leases at the end of this month or next month. So one of the things we've always asked, we know the L train work has to happen, but we're relying on this fine committee to give us accurate information, because that's all we can rely on. And we rely on you because you're the experts. So when that confidence is lost, it makes personal decisions and business decisions much more difficult. So please do your due diligence, but keep us abreast, because people have to make decisions at the end of this month and next month. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next speaker is Susan Reschia, who will be followed by Felice Kirby.
Tunnels are made out of granite. Granite doesn't go anywhere. It is rock. There was something in an article about preemptive. Like somebody was actually banging the walls of the tunnels to see if there's any weakness. I thought that was ridiculous. So tunnel is pretty much meant to last for 100 years, possibly 1,000 years. Rock is not going anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Felice Kirby. She's not speaking. Mr. Chairman, that's all of our public speakers for today.
Thank you, Mr. Marino, and let me thank the public speakers for coming and sharing with the board and with all of us. First, good afternoon, board members and public in attendance. Again, I thank you for being here. It was Governor Cuomo who first raised the idea of this meeting, and I've come to agree with that. Because the L deserves having a meeting to uniquely focus on the project status and new information that we've all been hearing about. As you know, the L train tunnel was severely damaged by flooding after Superstorm Sandy, requiring a significant rehabilitation project. The MTA came up with a plan based on leading transportation consultants Parsons Brinkerhoff, now known as WSP, that would require closing the tunnel for 15 months. In anticipation of the tunnel shutdown, which would disrupt more than 275,000 riders daily and their lives in this city, expert engineers from Cornell and Columbia engineering schools were brought in to provide a second opinion. They devised a plan that would avoid a shutdown and maintain 24/7 service. Given the time-sensitive nature of this project, I asked the MTA board to hold this meeting to review a plan and ask questions. The purpose of today's meeting is to ensure the board has extra dedicated time to consider this proposal. Today we'll hear from Jerry Giannetti from WSP, who helped devise the original plan, along with the expert panel and MTA leadership. He developed the enhanced plan and new recommendations you'll hear about later on today. Jerry's joined by WSP's Chief Structures Engineer, Mike Abrahams, and Judd Lau's Director of Health, Safety, and Environment, Warren Goodman, to answer questions within their areas of expertise. The L train tunnel situation has caused serious concern for this organization and raised many questions that we'll be exploring in the near future. The concept of designing a project to replace in kind, however, is an outdated methodology. Replace in kind, by definition, excludes innovation, enhancement, improvement, and the use of modern means and methods. The state, for example, didn't replace in kind the Tappan Zee Bridge. The state used the opportunity to build more lanes, enhance security equipment, new safety controls, added capacity to run trains on the bridge, and built a better bridge. If we're going to undertake a major project and spend hundreds of millions of dollars in the process, let's build something better. So I'm calling for a review of the MTA's process for contracting and design, including our policy of requesting designs as, quote, replace in kind, and a review to expand our use of design-build contracting agency-wide. Design-build is an innovative approach where a single private sector entity both designs and builds a project. This leads to cost and time savings instead of having separate entities handle closely related tasks. There are several other points I'd like to clarify and announce. First, WSP, Jacobs, and Judd Lau were the original design and construction team, and they are still handling those aspects of this project. We thank the deans of Cornell and Columbia Engineering Schools and their own teams for their time, commitment to this project, and their very helpful advice and recommendations. WSP has reviewed those suggestions, worked in close collaboration with the academic team, and agrees with them. You'll hear about that in a moment. WSP has modified the design to incorporate those recommendations. To be clear, WSP was the original designer and is still the designer you'll be hearing from shortly. But let's not lose sight of the most crucial fact. These new recommendations will avoid a shutdown of L train service. And that's important, not trivial. Today, I'm asking MTA Capital Construction and MTA Chief Development Officer Jano Lieber to take over construction of the project. This is a major undertaking and is in their area of expertise. They did a great job on WTC Cortlandt Station, and I'm confident, as we've seen recently, that their fresh eyes and expertise will be immensely helpful. As this is a priority project, I've asked MTA Managing Director Ronnie Hakem to take direct supervision. Ronnie oversees the MTA operating agencies, and we want to ensure this project has the full resources of the entire organization available. In addition, a new third-party consultant will be engaged to report to the MTA board, coordinate the construction with the ongoing train operations, and make sure the transition from construction to operation is seamless. The independent consultant will also review safety and environmental considerations and perform its due diligence to ensure safety and quality of service are followed. Finally, at the direction of Managing Director Hakem, New York City Transit, led by President Andy Byford, will continue to handle public outreach, customer service, alternate service planning, and delivery tasks both before and during the reconstruction project. Rigorous public outreach and our collaboration with government partners such as New York City and other stakeholders have been a proud signature of this project since day one. And we know that President Byford and his team will continue to do an outstanding job. Now, I'd like to turn to Jerry Giannetti, SVP at WSP, to take us through the new recommendations and project update. Mr. Giannetti.
members of the board, other officials, members of the public, thank you for inviting us here to kind of summarize and provide a project update. The L-Train project includes many components. The components are along the line to ensure that the safety or the Sandy rehabilitation or damage caused by Sandy is repaired. Also, it includes some core capacity improvements and some other minor project elements. We're going to focus in the area between the two fan plants for much of these recommendations. The fan plants are the two circles on either side of the East River. You can see in the middle of the river, that's where a pump room was. And generally speaking, when the Sandy storm occurred, largely the area between the two fan plants are what was inundated with what one of the members of the public referred to as brackish water, the salt water that's highly corrosive and can do a lot of damage to infrastructure. Just as one of the members of the public mentioned, the tunnel itself between those two fan plants was built and opened in 1924, almost 100 years old. It is two one-track tubes, but it's important to understand how it's constructed. It's constructed with a cast iron liner or a cast iron frame and then a concrete liner inside of that. And I've heard numbers vary from 225,000 people a day to, I heard someone mention 270,000 people a day. Of course, it carries a lot of people. I think that's the main message. The impact of Sandy filled the tunnel with 7 million gallons of salt water, and it caused a fair amount of damage to track, signals, electrical equipment, circuit breaker equipment, and impeding the service. The original plan for the L train would have called for a 15-month closure from Bedford Ave to 8th Ave, and I think we've heard that several times. It also required an alternative service plan prepared with bus shuttles, ferries, HOV lanes, and more. But it also included, the project itself included many things, which we'll review in a few minutes. There was an academic, we've heard reference to the academic team really providing a peer review, and members from Cornell University, Columbia universities, and several professors, and many of you have heard them speak over the past couple of weeks, reviewed a peer review to examine, really to take a fresh look at where we were heading with the project. We worked closely with them, as well as Jacobs, the construction manager, and MTA. The expert panel developed key project design alternatives to accomplish key project objectives, and that is maintaining the core systems that was the original intent of the project. How could we do things differently? I heard one comment that in newspapers and earlier from a member of the public, but they were only in there for an hour. And I think over the past 6 weeks, we have worked tirelessly with them, providing piles of data and reports that have been prepared over the past years. It also included, before they went into that tunnel for that hour that keeps being referred to, they could drive the tunnel themselves on the computer. So when they got in the tunnel, it was not foreign to them. It's actually many things that they had already seen. What's new and just a highlight of the, talking about the peer review recommendations, just to highlight what's new. There is a reduced amount of demolition required. We did focus on the bench walls, as that creates a fair amount of silica, and that needs attention. What's new is stabilizing and categorizing, which we'll talk about in a few moments, of the bench wall. What also changes is how we're dealing with the cables, and we'll talk about cables that are carrying the critical systems, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Another key change is adding smart sensor systems to the bench wall itself to monitor bench wall movement, which is similar to what has been done on many bridges around the area. And there was also a change focusing on public safety and adding an independent environmental monitor. What doesn't change is many of the system elements, which I heard much of the concern from many of the public members, are still included in the project. The continuous welded rail, the replacement of the third rail, much of the horizontal track and the horizontal alignment modifications will take place, replacing all the electrical and the communication systems, tunnel resilience investments such as replacing all the pumps and upgrading them. ADA and station improvements are still in the project, and substations and some of one of the current circuit breaker houses is actually in the tunnel next to one of the pumps at the sump of the tunnel, pulling that out and moving that to the surface street so it's not susceptible, God forbid there was another storm, and adding new tunnel lighting. There were 10 recommendations by the peer review, and what we've done is group them into 4 basic areas: the cabling, the bench walls, resiliency items, and enhanced public safety, and we'll walk through those now. Beginning with the racking systems and the cabling. Racking systems are not new. Racking systems have been used here in New York. Number 7 line extended out to Hudson Yards includes a racking system, but it's more commonly used around the globe. And we found a number of examples in the Crossrail in London, in Hong Kong, and in Riyadh. There were a number of others too, but we just use these as examples. Racking systems are common in transit projects around the globe. All the cables that were in the bench wall will be moved. Well, maybe it's incorrect to say moved. Will be newly installed on the racking system, and the cables that are in the bench wall now will be abandoned. The frequency and depth of bolt penetration poses no risk to the tunnel lining, because what we're doing is something different than is looked at before. And I heard a couple of references to this, and I'm sure we'll get a couple of questions about it, particularly with the article that was in the paper this morning in the New York Times, is that the racking system manages the number of penetrations in the tunnel liner. It also requires 60% fewer bolts than individually bolting the cables to the tunnel lining, and that was what was provided in a report several years ago in 2014 or 15. And so this is very different than what was proposed then. Switching from the cables to the bench wall, there are the major recommendation here is leaving the bench wall that doesn't need to be moved, leaving it in place. And the photograph on the image on the screen is an area of a bench wall that looks pretty good. It looks very good, by the way, and it's 100 years old. What we're going to do is categorize the bench walls into 3 basic categories: leave in place with no action, leave in place and strengthen with FRP or some type of cementitious material, or maybe a steel bar. Those are some options that we have open to us. But that area of the bench wall that is falling apart, if you will, those areas will be removed. It's not the objective of this project nor our team to leave something in place that will have to be repaired in a short period of time. We're looking for, decades of a solution here. There is, we are in the middle of still evaluating that wall. We know that at least 60% of the bench walls that are in the tunnels today can stay, but 40% is falling into this review that categorizes them into those categories that I just talked about. We had a non-destructive testing team, which is like when you go to a doctor, you have a non-destructive test by having an X-ray to show that your maybe arm is broken. This non-destructive testing took place 2 weeks ago. A report was developed last week, and Mike has a long day because this evening he's going out to compare the non-destructive test with what he can visually inspect in the field and draw some conclusions. So that's going on this week, and then next week we'll be looking at recommendations and having discussions as a collaborative group, which includes us, MTA, the construction manager, and the contractor. One of the other recommendations that came up with the bench wall was strengthening it using a material that many people may not have heard before, and this is fiber reinforced polymer. I would bet that many of you that commuted here today may have gone through a structure that used FRP to strengthen some of its structural members, and it is fairly well a well-used material here and other parts of the globe. It is a material that was used on the number 7 line extension to Hudson Yards. It was used on 2nd Avenue subway phase 1, and it is used in many bridges. And the image that you see on the screen is FRP, the white material, I believe, at the top of the screen, coating the beam. One of the other comments that have come up is this silica, airborne silica. One of the key elements in what makes this project different is that we are reducing the amount of concrete that's going to be removed. The project will comply and meet all environmental standards, including those for silica mitigation, and these standards actually changed recently in the past couple of years, and we will be complying with those standards, so the contractor will be complying with those standards. The concrete demolition in general requires silica mitigation plans. There are projects going on all over the city that have these mitigation plans in place and are being implemented. Recent MTA projects completed with environmental mitigation plans are really safety mitigation plans, of which silica mitigation is part of the overall plan, include Brooklyn Battery Tunnel and Queens Midtown Tunnel, which were both done on nights and weekends, and the silica mitigation plan was designed to address silica mitigation prior to opening to the public, so it's opened in a safe way before public enters the project site. And of course, it's going on right now in many subway stations around the city. One of the other recommendations included addressing resiliency. I remember being in the governor's conference room, and one of the questions was, what are you doing to address resiliency so that this tunnel doesn't flood again? And there were a number of recommendations that were made with regard to the pump capacity, permanent generators, moving them in place, and considering other methods to keep water from entering this tunnel, and those were all part of the study and are now being followed up on as well. A couple other recommendations included a detailed evaluation of options, control options for dust and airborne silica, and I think we just covered a lot of those. But what's new here is that they recommended a third-party review of air quality. And what that means is that while the MTA may have someone reviewing air quality, they also have pressures to open on Monday morning. The contractor may have someone reviewing for air quality. They have pressures to complete the work. Someone that's a third party that can evaluate the air quality doesn't have an axe to grind, and this was one of their suggestions. They also, on the public safety side, and this is what makes the bench wall alternative or option really feasible, is to monitor the structural condition with real-time smart technology, adding a fiber optic cable along this bench wall so that before there's an issue, if there's a shift, it's part of a warning system. So this is something new, I believe, to this type of application. The new plan still will address leaks in the tunnel lining and repairs. That part of the contract is not changing at all. All necessary track repairs from ties to rail are still being done. In fact, I understand from talking to the contractor that new rail has already been moved into the tunnel and is sitting on the ties waiting to be installed. In summary, all the goals of the initial plan are still being met. The integration of tested technologies, that is, from the racking system to fortifying the bench wall to applying the fiber optic monitoring device, will lead to a resilient, long-lasting infrastructure improvement in the form of a rehabilitated tunnel. This new plan certainly lessens the impact on the riders by avoiding a total shutdown. The new system design achieves all, and I think I've mentioned this several times, achieves all the functional outcomes that the original plan did. Upgrades to the pump system still included. Modifying and changing out the track and the track alignment, placing new cables, new systems, and instead of removing and reconstructing the bench wall, removing or abandoning and fortifying or simply abandoning the bench wall. The racking system allows greater access to cables for inspection. It also allows ease in construction because instead of cutting it up into pieces and pulling them from manhole to manhole, it can simply be unraveled from a reel, placed up and affixed to the racking system. The smart sensor allows monitoring on a continuous basis rather than a periodic basis, and this enhances the safety and functionality and includes addressing resiliency as the original plan does. So the question is, after these comments, what are we doing? we have broken out into a number of work groups. The work groups are essentially the work, some of those subject areas, those 4 subject areas that we just went through, cables, bench wall, resiliency, and so on. The groups are made up of members of MTA CC, City Transit, our company, WSP, the construction manager, Jacobs, and then contractor, Judlow and TC Electric. We are working together pretty much daily to make some of the changes that I just went through. So the L-train improvements, as I mentioned before, included a list, but basically the same core components are still in the project. And in fact, if you look at really the reason for the shutdown, it's basically between those 2 vent shafts. And so that's where the changes have occurred, not outside of that, and those many modifications still continue. And this is another list of the still the components that continue to move forward. And in fact, many of these are either under construction, some are actually open. WSP recommends moving forward with the new and improved approach of the rehabilitation of the tunnel that meets the original project goals while avoiding a complete shutdown and reducing the customer impact. And really this look is a customer-driven review. MTA will continue to provide regular updates and an ongoing dialogue, of course, to the board and to the public. That concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Giannetti. Please remain, not there, but have
Okay.
a seat. Now I'll ask board members for their questions or comments, or both. Mr. Albert?
I hope you'll indulge me. I have quite a few questions, but I won't take ultra long. So I guess this is directed at Mr. Giannetti. Was this new technology known of 3 years ago when this entire plan was being devised?
Good. So can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. These technologies have been used on many projects individually, but in a tunnel like this, it's never been brought together like this in a tunnel rehab project.
Okay, and you are convinced that having never been done in an environment such as this, that it would work here?
We're very confident with the plan, and in fact, we wouldn't propose a plan we didn't think would be safe and durable.
Okay, how long will this fix be good for in this new version versus the 75 to 100 years that the original plan would have been good for?
I think for those that followed the original press conference, you heard that Tom O'Rourke, the professor from Cornell, who's very well known in the tunneling industry, says this is not a Band-Aid solution. We concur with that assessment. Longevity, of course, is hard to say in these harsh environments. If maintained, this can last decades. This is a generational investment, not a Band-Aid. We have a bench wall that is in great shape after 100 years, and you saw some images. You also see some bench wall that is crumbling. We're not going to leave anything in place that we think will fail. That is why we will fortify it. That's why we're taking the extra steps to investigate and do the non-destructive testing and visually go out and with that non-destructive testing data and make an assessment. And the fiber optic sensor is another way to monitor remotely and get an early warning if something starts moving.
Does FTA have to approve of this new plan, and will any federal funds that have been advanced have to be repaid?
So maybe I'll jump in on that one.
Sure.
We've already started working with the FTA, having, of course, the benefit of knowing that we need a little work to be done first before presenting them with an approach. We're a little behind with the shutdown, the federal government shutdown, but again, we'll continue the collaboration and don't anticipate certainly don't anticipate giving money back, and would think this is still a good Sandy recovery and resiliency project.
Okay. This new plan envisions cables being strung along the wall in the tunnel. Those cables will then be available for a vandal or terrorist or something to have access to them, whereas before they would have been buried in the wall. Is that a fair assessment? Aren't they now exposed in the wall? I mean, they're covered in a cable, but that cable is available. It's reachable.
The short answer is no. Along the bench wall, existing and the new parts that'll be replaced as a bench wall, there'll be fiber optic sensors that'll serve two purposes. One, to give us an ability to monitor the condition of that bench wall at all times. But second, give us an ability to ensure that there's nobody unauthorized in that area.
So there's an intruder alert built
Absolutely, and that's the entire story on those sensors, and I think it's a very good innovation.
Okay. My next question.
If I could, placing them up on the racking system allows, and this is something that the peer review panel was pretty adamant about,